Greetings, Artie from Artifact Electronics. So in this episode we're going to continue our investigation of the parts Model 3 I bought and see if we can put the original back together, button it up and call it done. So last night I spent a couple of hours tearing the keyboard apart while removing all of the key tops, cleaning up. I've installed the missing contact or the broken contact from the parts machine, which is the greater than caret key. You can see the keyboard came out rather nicely. Took off all of the stickers and polished up the keys a bit, and lo and behold, they all work. Now, taking the key tops off is a somewhat delicate operation. You shouldn't just stick screwdrivers or pliers in there to pull off the key tops, because at a minimum you might scratch them, and at an extreme you may actually break the key contact themselves, like the original was broken on this. So checking on eBay, there are now key removal tools available. There are these strange looking wire forms reminiscent of a kitchen whisk, and you kind of slip it over opposing diagonal corners of the keys, and then you yank on them, and it's kind of hard to explain, but just imagine two wire loops hooked on opposite ends of the key and then you pulling those up. It didn't look very confidence instilling, and but I found what I think is a much better solution, and that is basically a normal chip puller. It's got the hooked ends, and you gently slide this over the key, push it together, and then with a gentle rocking motion you pull it up, and the key comes right off without any problems and without any damage. And I guess now that there are a lot of gaming keyboards out there that have actual key tops on them again, this kind of tool has become popular, both for those gaming keyboards as well as for vintage keyboards. But so far for the keyboard, that is done. Let's turn our attention to the disk drives. Remember, the second drive on this one, even though it worked fine, but it lived or lives in a world of its own because it can only read disks that have been written by itself. So we're going to pull the drives from the parts machine, do a quick service on it, and then see if those work. Alright, so we need to gain access to the mechanism inside, and the manufacturer was kind enough to use these plastic pushpin-like things to hold the main board to the drive, and I'm sure they're really easy to put in. I guess you just slide them in and then you press the center pin down and they hold in place. A dream for manufacturing, but to get them out is a real pain in the ass, because you got to push the center pin by putting a screwdriver in here and then kind of levering it up so the center pin pops up. And if you do it properly and patiently, eventually the center pops up here, and you just pull this out. Come on. But the one on this side, you see I got it to come out a little bit. It just won't come out anymore. I mean, that thing is stuck in there. And since I do expect to have to take this apart, this drive apart again, I'm going to do the unthinkable, and I'm just going to cut that thing off, and we'll just put some M3 nylon screws in there like this to hold that in place once we put it back together again, and that's just going to make it a lot easier to take apart. So So goodbye. And the board is free. Next we need to remove this front connector and then slide the board so it opens up, and now we have access to the drive. And see, the push pin still won't give up. I mean, the remains of it are still sitting in here, and now they're gone. Step number one is to clean the head surface, which is sitting right under here. There you can see it, very gently with some isopropyl on a Q-tip. And doesn't look like anything's coming off, but so that should clean the head. Next we're going to take actually the same Q-tip and clean the rails that the head slides on. I mean, to do this properly, you have to disassemble it further to get to to get underneath the rails. But I found that just doing it this way, without disassembling everything, works just as well. So we clean the rail on this side, we clean the rail on the other side. You can move the head forward. And clean the remainder of the rail. And yes, there's stuff coming off the rail. Well, that's old grease. It's to be expected. Now this head, it's pretty rough. And here, the friction it causes. So what we're going to do is go ahead and lube those rails. For that I use a product called Super Lube. It's, I guess silicone grease would be better, but this is the next best thing. And the way I do it first is, again, I coat a Q-tip. Not too much, not too little either. And then transfer that to the drive rails. I'm going to use a little more this time than usual, because that doesn't slide very smoothly on those rails. So hopefully a little grease, a little extra grease here will get it moving nicely again. And if we turn the drive around, we actually do get access to the rails through this opening here. So I can continue putting some grease on there. And then turning the stepper motor. Distribute the grease. Alright, turn it back over again and inspect, make sure that there's no grease splattered on the head or anything. Take a clean Q-tip and kind of get rid of grease that's bunched up here and there. let's see, a place I think I missed is the front part of the rail over here. A little more. Shouldn't overdo it, but looks like a lot of dirt got into this guy. Let's see, can you see that? Yeah. And some more on this side. And that concludes the lubrication of the head assembly. Right in here is the track 0 switch, and all that needs is a squirt of air. Yeah, this isn't working too good, but this bottle's almost empty. Oh, come on. Nope, that's it. That's all she wrote. Let's hope that was enough. Next, what we're going to do is lubricate the drive door, and it basically runs inside these two slots over here. And the best way to do that is just take a toothpaste and put a blob of the grease inside those rails on each side. That was very successful there. Okay. And then we just work the door a couple of times, and again check to make sure that the extra grease isn't going somewhere that it shouldn't go to, which is anywhere other than the actual rails for the door lock. And that's pretty much it as far as service is concerned. This does the trick, or should do the trick if there are no real defects in there. So we'll put this back into the slots over here and slide it forward. Replace the front connector. We then go ahead and reseat every single one of these back connectors. Because those have been in there for a long time. Now make sure, if you're going to pull them all out for whatever reason, to take a picture. I mean, wire memory will go a long way, but if you're working on this for a while, wire memory may not be your friend after a few days when this has been moved around. I mean, they're numbered, you know, it makes perfect sense. 12, 11, whatever, 6, 8. So see, it's very assembly friendly. But now that all of these are in, we'll put the screws in to replace those stupid push pins. And then it's time to see what this drive does. And to put it back together, we have an M3 nut, and of course the M3 bolt over here. And this should actually be quite simple. And that, well, it's not that simple because the nut doesn't fit in. Well, the nut fits in, but it doesn't fit in with the pliers. So we have to revert to tweezers. And the tweezers don't fit in either. So we hold them like this, slide them in there, and it grips. And you don't even have to hold it from the other side because the channel holds it in place. So there you go. One side's done. We'll put in the other side, and then it's off to the races. Oh, and I almost forgot. You also need to remove the spindle belt. Clean the surfaces with alcohol, both on the motor and on the flywheel here. And then you take the belt and wash it with soap and water, and you let it dry thoroughly. Now pay close attention that you may not see this, but the belt, the outside of the belt is actually textured, but the inside of the belt, in this case, is smooth and dirty. And when I'm done with it, it'll just be smooth. So if the belt gets turned around and you're doing Mobius strip experiments or whatever, before putting it back, make sure that the textured side of the belt is out. A word of caution, again, as I said, this needs to be cleaned with isopropyl. The outer surface needs to be cleaned with isopropyl, but the stroboscope over here, that's just printed on paper. Don't make the same mistake I did. If you get alcohol on here, all of the black will start running and it'll look horrible. So very careful when you wash this, when you clean this, and if you have a lot of dirt on this, just use a slightly damp tissue to get the dirt off. Alright, looks like we met up with success. The drive that I just serviced. So what I did was I put an LDOS operating system in the lower drive and told it to back itself up to drive number 1. It formatted, backed up, and the big test, of course, is taking the disk that was made on drive 1 and see if the machine boots off of that, i.e. drive 0 can read it. And as you can see, it can. I did back up a bunch of OSs and did the cross-drive compatibility testing to see if what was backed up to 1 could be read on 0, what was backed up to 0 could be read on 1, and everything worked just great. So, and I followed that up with taking the second drive from the parts machine, giving it the same treatment, the same service treatment, and that one also works. So I have a grand total of 3 working Model 3 drives now, and I guess the parts machine will stay a parts machine for now, and at least that way I know that I can probably keep this guy running for a really long time. Well, let's button things up. Of course, nothing can be as easy as it seems. As I was putting the machine back together, I noticed that the screen was getting a bit jumpy. and that basically the machine was, the screen was extremely sensitive to vibration, which led me to believe that it must be a connection somewhere. And I checked all sorts of connections, and at one point I turned on the system and the screen didn't even light up at all. But what I finally found is this here is the connector that feeds 12 volts to the screen and plugs into here. And so I decided it would be a good thing to examine. I examined the pins and they look clean. But if you look at the back of the pins, I don't know how well you can see that, but both of these pins that feed the 12 volt to the monitor have cracked solder joints. And when looking next to it, this is the AC input. One of the AC input pins also has a cracked solder joint. The rest are fine, but I'll reflow everything, and maybe then we can go on completing to assemble the machine. Alright, we are finally done. Resoldering those connectors fixed the screen problem, and that one cracked joint on the AC line coming into the power supply, that would have probably caused me all sorts of problems down the road, so I'm really glad I found that. But we have a fully functional Model 3 now. It looks really nice. It has 2 working disk drives, and as I said before, now I can start to really do some serious programming on this. Thanks for watching. Please support the channel, subscribe, a thumbs up, and leave me comments. I love reading the comments, and I also love to get suggestions on what to do next. One of the problems I have is I'm having a hard time finding things to repair, but drop me a hint of what to do and I'll try to follow it. So ladies and gentlemen, until we meet again, have a pleasant one.